just based on selfish ideas was not the way to end suffering. I could tell that very quickly. So I left the United States. I volunteered for the American Peace Corps in 1963, just before President Kennedy was assassinated. So I was actually in the Peace Corps training in Hawaii when he was assassinated, and that was, of course, a big shock. And I was sent off to Sabah in Malaysia. And, of course, this brought me into the Theravada world, in the fact that I was in Southeast Asia, where I'd never been before. And, of course, Thailand was not far away. It was an easy place to go to on holidays. So I went, first holiday I went off to Thailand and Cambodia. Now, when I finished my contract, then I returned to Thailand and started practicing meditation at one of the main temples in Bangkok. And from there, I began to see the value of meditation, which led me to an interest in ordination. Now, before the Buddha passed away, he was questioned, what will we do without our teacher? And he says, I leave you the Dhamma Vinaya. And so this is quite an enigmatic statement. Why didn't he just say, I leave you the Dhamma? Because in the West, most people are interested in Dhamma. They love the Dhamma. And the Vinaya is not so popular. And so, and oftentimes easily seen in terms of moralistic boundaries and restrictions on behavior that modern day people do not respect or like or think necessary in their lives. But I found in the training I received with Luang Por Chah in his monastery in northeast Thailand in Newborn, it was I began to really value the fact of learning to live within a restrained way rather than just interpreting things in my own way, and this sense of I can do it myself attitude that I had. And of course, Ajahn Chah is very famous for his strict Vinaya, because in Thailand there are, so many 200,000 monks and monasteries everywhere, ranging from the very best to probably the worst. They've got an enormous amount of Buddhist monks living in Thailand, and of course there's and part of Thai Buddhism can be just seen as ceremonial or academic. Luang Por Chah was very much emphasizing bhatipata, or meditation practice, combined with the Vinaya. And this I found a practice most beneficial. Before, I just used a method of meditation, somebody's method, that was only applicable really to a kind of formal sitting practice. But in Luang Por Chah's approach, his whole way of developing vipassana was through living the monastic life, using Vinaya as a reference for and as a guide for behavior, physical behavior and speech, to be mindful. And so the emphasis was on mindfulness, awareness, knowing yourself, knowing what you're feeling, knowing the causes of suffering, the attachment to views, opinions, and desires that arise in our minds, investigating this according to the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. So this was the basic teaching Luang Por Chah emphasized, and when he taught, he always was mentioning these Four Noble Truths, and to learn how to investigate them and develop the insights so that one can find out for oneself. It's no longer just, what the Buddha taught in India 2,552 years ago, but you can actually find out for yourself. And of course, this attitude of finding out for yourself is very much what attracts Western people, or in countries such as European countries or North America, Australia, New Zealand, countries where Buddhism really had there was not much interest, knowledge, or understanding of it before. And in the past 50 years, of course, there's been an enormous increase in an interest in the teaching of the Buddha. And I've been involved in that for over 50 years, actually. I've been in about 1955, 56, I became interested in Buddhism. So I've seen from a rather, when it first started on the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was more like a fashion, like Zen Buddhist way of thinking, paradoxes and enigmatic statements were kind of fashionable to fling about or think about at that time among the intelligentsia of the Bay Area. And so it could be seen as something very superficial and just a kind of silly fashion of the age. But it actually affected many of us in a profound way. As you can see, I'm sitting here now and spending most of my life as a Buddhist monk, because it first started with the kind of interpretations of Japanese Zen Buddhism that were available in English in 1955. Now, Luang Por Chah, I found, was when I went to Thailand, my main interest had been through the Japanese Zen literature. I'd never practiced it. I'd never found a teacher in the Bay Area. I looked during those years I lived in Berkeley. I went everywhere where there was a possibility of finding some meditation teacher, but couldn't find any. And so this, of course, made it very clear I had to go to Asia to find one. I thought of going to Japan and taking up Zen Buddhism, but when I was assigned to Sabah, and then I was in a nice warm place, in fact quite hot, and then going to Thailand, nice warm country, and I remember those cold winters in Japan in the Navy, and I heard that the Japanese monks did not heat their monasteries. So people wonder, they say, why did you leave Zen Buddhism and join Theravada? What did you find so? Why did you choose Theravada over Zen? And there's nothing doctrinal. It's just the weather. So then Thailand, of course, offers an opportunity to live in a country that's, you could say, is 95% Buddhist. And there are not many countries left like that where they have, most of the population regard themselves as Theravadan Buddhists. And of course, the king Bhumibol Adulyadej, he's a Buddhist, and the whole structure and the cultural values of Thailand are based on, very strongly intertwined with Buddhism. Now, living with somebody like Luang Por Chah for 10 years, I thought was indeed an honor, because I'd never really met anybody that affected me so strongly as he did. And when I met him, I was not particularly looking for a teacher. I didn't have any great need at that time, or I didn't feel any great interest in. I'd been to so many teachers already. I was more or less looking for a place to train as a bhikkhu. I thought I wanted to, if I was a bhikkhu, I wanted to be a good one, and I needed the discipline. I needed to learn how to obey a teacher, how to surrender myself to discipline that I had no ability to manipulate or change in any way. I saw that during my life, I had lived very much manipulating conditions for my own benefit, and the result was not a positive one. It was not the way out of suffering. In fact, by the age of 30, I was quite a miserable character. And so, learning to submit, to surrender to a form, to a tradition, was quite a new thing to be doing for me. Even though it's an ancient tradition, I'd never, Americans, we don't have ancient traditions in that country. It's all about progress and modernization and making things better. So learning to live within a very conservative type of Thai Buddhism in northeast Thailand and Vinaya discipline, but also it wasn't just, a kind of military training camp atmosphere. It was based on mindfulness, reflection, and observing. Now, it was a unique situation for me because I was the first Westerner to go there, to be with Ajahn Chah. And I couldn't speak the Thai language, and nobody there could speak English. And then the cultural attitude was very different, from my own American values. And so it was, it brought up a lot of all kinds of emotions, negative emotions. At first I was very inspired. I had the inspiration. But then actually through living there and having to learn another language and conform to a system after you'd been so, emphasized you were nonconformist and you were asserting yourself as an independent creature, and then finding yourself in absolute conformity to an ancient tradition. This brought up all kinds of doubts and negative reactions in my mind. Now, Luang Por Chah was very good at getting me to look at my mental states. Even before we had a common language to discuss Dhamma with, he somehow had this intuitive sense. He could pick up on the kind of emotional quality that one had in the moment, and then his direction was always encouraging one to look at it, to see it, to observe it, and so they have this sense of being the knower of the condition, not the condition. So even when learning the Thai language, there were certain phrases that I'd pick up because you'd hear them quite often. And these phrases, just simple reflections, Luang Por Chah kept using in his talks, in his Dharma talks. And they were just like don't be the owner of your feelings, be the witness to them. So this attitude, they used the mantra a lot of Puto, the kind of Buddha's name, as a way of reminding yourself to be the awareness itself and observe the condition you're actually feeling in the moment. And I found this so something I could actually do because of my frustration, my reactions to discipline, and the kind of paranoia that can generate in somebody's mind when they don't quite understand what's going on most of the time. So the way they'd laugh, or there'd be a joke or laughter, and I wouldn't know what they were laughing at, and then they'd look at me, and I could interpret that as they're laughing at me as being some kind of humiliation, or I could look at that feeling, the way I would on my personal way of interpreting experience. I began to observe it in the sense of being the knower rather than the condition began to take its effect so that my life in the monastery, within a couple of years, I'd become really I thought myself very much of a Thai monk. And when the Western men started coming there, I didn't really want them, actually. Because I'd learned how to be a Thai monk, and they hadn't, and I was the only one that, had to translate for them. And of course, all the kind of wild attitudes and that, was the hippie era, and the kind of characters that would arrive at the monastery in Ubon, I found, it was like distressing to me, because I had kind of developed my practice through this kind of surrendering to, in that way, and learning to find a measure of peace, tranquility, through not having a lot of conflict with others. And then, of course, the ones that bring up most of one's strong emotions, I found, were other Americans. They could arouse extreme emotions more than any Thai could do. And so eventually I ran away after my 6th year, because I couldn't face having to be with all these Western monks, and me being the senior one. So I deliberately left and eventually went to India, and there I spent 6 months walking as a Tudong monk in India. I thought I wanted to see if I could actually live like Gautama the Buddha. And so, during that time, I kept thinking back of all the generosity I'd received in Thailand and of Luang Por Chah. And it was in India that I had this strong opening of the heart. It was what I call Gatanyu Gataveti, or gratitude. It wasn't just a kind of intellectual thanks for the meditation lessons kind of thing. It was a really gut feeling of realizing how much had been given to me, support from the lay people, encouragement from the lay people, the bhikkhus that I lived with, and of course Luang Por Chah as a teacher. Well, that what I call the Gatanyu as a kind of heart opening. I call it for me it was a heart opening experience. Before that, so much of my monastic life was still operating from the very self-centered ego, where I want to get my practice, get my jhanas, get my samadhi, get enlightened. There's so much of me as a person trying to get things and operate, within the system in order from this very willful, self-centered position. And this experience of Gatanyu that I had in India was, I saw through that. The heart opened up wide. Before, I'd say I had a closed-off heart, like a tight fist, just tight, and and I'm the most, I'm in this to get enlightened for myself. And then after the Gatanyu experience and insight, it was like the sense of something had really shifted. That tight, self-centered selfishness seemed to have resolved itself. And all I could think of then was going back to Thailand and helping, supporting in any way, being a good disciple to Luang Por Chah. I thought the only way you can repay a teacher that's given you so much is to be a good disciple, practice what he was teaching. I knew that would make him very pleased. And not to be a pain to him, not to give him any problems. So at that time Ajahn Chah was expanding. The monasteries were growing everywhere, and there were all kinds of people seeking ordination, and the amount of disciples increased. And there were always problems in any monastery. There are always going to be problems. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make an effort not to be a problem to Luang Por Chah. So when I went back to India, from India to Thailand, I offered myself a kind of magnanimous gesture. I offer myself to you. And of course, he just smiled, and then eventually he sent me off to establish Wat Pa Nana Chat, which is exactly the thing I most didn't want to do. Now, even though Ajahn Chah was good at getting me to do things I didn't want to do, I did have confidence and trust in him, in his wisdom, after living with him for many years. That I didn't really question it. My vow was to help in any way I could, and to do what I could, what Luang Por Chah wanted me to do, and to be a good disciple to him, and practice what I'd learned with the teaching he'd given me. So this led eventually to 2 years I was at Nana Chat, and then the Southeast Asia fell to the communists, the panic in Thailand, and eventually I began to think about going back to the West, which, strangely enough, I ended up in England rather than the United States. Now this, in teaching in England for 33 years now, where, say, you have, our monasteries in England, we have two main monasteries, Amaravati, which is in Hertfordshire, north of London, and the first monastery that we had, it was south of London in West Sussex, Citta Viveka. And so there was a great interest in Buddhist meditation, in samatha vipassana practices amongst the British and Europeans. In general, there was, we began to grow very rapidly. And of course, seeing, the results of living in England, which is the country I know the best, living there for 33 years, and teaching meditation and establishing monasteries, ordaining monks, nuns there, and to train them with the Vinaya, and to develop the values of samana, sanya. So like the monastic tradition that the Buddha established is based on alms mendicancy. And this, of course, is totally anachronistic to Western European culture. And so to make yourself, without, any support, to depend on the four requisites, and that was something that was just not in the minds of people in the West, in either in North America or in Europe at the time. And it's still difficult for people to really appreciate, because it's something so out of place in the value systems of modern life in Europe or America at this time. And yet, living in England for this long period, there's never been any shortage of the requisites. Like the four requisites the Buddha allowed samanas, he allowed us a robe. We can wear a robe which is based on a very low standard of material, rag robes. So the Buddha said you can get your cloth from what's left over, what the society throws out, or we go to charnel grounds where they wrap corpses in cloth, and you could take that. You could take the kind of rags that the lay communities didn't want. And so that's about as low a standard for clothing as you can imagine. And of course this is, and this wasn't the rule based, this isn't the rule that you can only do that. But what happened was that the lay people began to have such faith in the followers of the Buddha that they offered to present good quality material to them. And that's what the katina ceremonies are. Every year after the Vasa we have the katina, this traditional ceremony of offering cloth to the monastic sangha. And of course, because I've never had to go off and take rags off a corpse or anything like that. In fact, they usually give me high quality cloth. And we have to sew it and make it look like rags, patches. And dye it an ugly color like this. But then food is a necessity. You have something to wear, something to eat. So he allowed us to have an alms bowl, as you saw us all eating from alms bowls. And of course this means that we go out and collect food. As bindabata means dropping food into a bowl. So this is a custom, of an alms mendicant, and it's based on a low standard. We're not gourmets, or so we want only your best food. We take what is offered, So you're going on bindabata, and people, whether they're poor or wealthy, or they're good cooks or not very good cooks, or whether they're vegetarian or meat-eating people, we take what is offered, and this is, the practice of alms food. So we're dependent on this, the lay community offering food, and then shelter would be very difficult in England. It's based on root of a tree. I can't imagine, living very long under a root of a tree in England without dying. In India you can actually see that, and you have these magnificent trees there, but how, or here in Malaya it probably is possible, but not in England. It would be really hard work to have to stay under a tree. But notice that the standard is always the lowest possible one, because then something's always offered that's better than this low reference point. And then for medicine, for illness, we have to have medicine, and this is based on a very low standard of that time, fermented cow's urine. So this shocks the British, so they really come forth when we get sick, see that we get good medical health. And so these four requisites are reflected on every day in monasteries, the four requisites, because you're training yourself as a samana to see that this is the four requisites are adequate for the day. They're not guaranteed for a lifetime or anything. So it's just today I have a shelter, food. I receive food in the alms bowl. I have a robe and medicine for any sickness that I have. And then arises the katanyu, gratitude, because we live our lives always in this way of depending on the good-heartedness and generosity of others. And of course, the lay people, whether they're here in Malaya or in Thailand or in England, they're always giving us, they find joy in offering. And even monks who have gone tudong or walking in England, Scotland, and Ireland have gone, bindabata or receiving food in villages where there aren't any Buddhists, and yet you still receive food. People come forth once they understand what you need. It seems to bring up a very good quality of mind in the lay community, even if they're not Buddhists or they don't really understand what you are. It seems to generate goodness in itself. And of course, this alms mendicant tradition has survived 2,552 years, which says a lot for the wisdom of the Buddha, because there's not many traditions that have such a long lineage that I know of, that are still existent at this time. Now, this tradition also has maintained its purity. It's not been corrupted or adapted all out of proportion. It seems to be able to adapt itself to the rise and falls of many different political systems and periods of development and progress, and then of degeneration and loss. You look at the history of Buddhism over that period of time, and it is about, it's at period of times it flourishes, and other times it seems to fade away. But it still survives. And up to this very today here in Kuala Lumpur, this very moment, this is the monks, the bhikkhus, the nuns here representing that tradition and that lineage that traces itself back to the original Buddha in India that established the Dhamma teaching and the Vinaya. So this is my reflection on the value of that tradition, and seeing it as something to really respect, and then this sense of gratitude arises. I have an enormous sense of gratitude to the Buddha, the Gautama the Buddha, the one who established this teaching and the Vinaya. So when I think of the Buddha, I do feel this gratitude, a sense of piti, as they say, or rapture, a really good feeling, that comes not through. It's not about being happy because I get something. It's just a sense of a lovely sense of gratitude and joy at having been one who has this opportunity to live this way at this time. Because, say, living as a Buddhist alms mendicant in England was never part of my social and cultural expectation. It was the most kind of impossible thing to think about. I never once thought I'd be living as an alms mendicant in England for so long. And yet, this is what's happened. And this is where the kind of practice of the Dhamma and the life kind of, you have to flow with it. You just can't try to arrange it and according to on your own terms. It's a matter of relinquishing, letting go, trusting. Before I went to England, I began to get a lot of anxiety about going to live in England, for example, because Thailand's very easy, to be a bhikkhu, and the culture and the people and everything. You can take everything for granted there. It's very easy. Wherever you go in Thailand, people know what to do, and so that's where and in India I could survive because they still respect the sadhu or the religious mendicant. It's still possible to live as an alms mendicant in India. But in England, I didn't know, having ever lived there. And what would happen, if I can't have money, how am I going to get on in life, living in a very materialistic country that don't, may not have any interest or even may feel very hostile to somebody in a robe like this. And so I went to Ajahn Chah before the time came to go to England, and I asked him, I said, I really wonder if I could actually survive for very long in England as an alms mendicant, keeping the vinaya like we do here. I just have grave doubts about it. And so Luang Por Chah said something to me that really impressed me. He said, you mean there are no kind people in England? And so I thought, well, I'm sure there are. And then he said, well, then go there. And he didn't say Buddhists either. He said kind people. That struck me because I had a much more cynical attitude about the nature of humanity. My attitude is that basically we're selfish. And that's what, our true nature is selfish. Luang Por Chah's attitude is that we're basically good. And since he was a wise person, that kind of changed my, I thought, that's a better way of looking at humanity than the way I looked at it. It's basically selfish. And so then going to live in England, I remember that people basically good. And that's what I've found in the reality of living as a bhikkhu, as a Buddhist monk in the UK and in Europe in general. Well, that is something to contemplate, and then this sense of gratitude arises, and a faith, confidence in practice of Dhamma, and in the wisdom that the Buddha, the original Buddha, Gautama the Buddha, in which he could, so well establish a conventional form that could last this long. That takes wisdom to be able to see how to establish something, a religious convention and a teaching that is incorruptible. Like the Four Noble Truths. That's never been corrupted by anybody in 2,552 years. It's just the same noble truth that he gave his 5 friends in Saranath 2,500 years ago, and then the monastic order has survived through this period of time up to the present time. Now it appears in countries like United States, Canada, in European countries, not only Western Europe, but European Union now. Western Europe is no longer politically correct. European Union, and in countries all over the world. I've been invited to Russia several times and given meditation retreats in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and been invited so many places that I can't possibly meet all the invitations because I haven't learned how to appear in 2 places at the same moment. That I can't do. But within the limitations that I find myself, I try to meet the needs and the interest that is generated all over the world. And then with the media at this time, the mass media, there's no longer a dearth of information and scriptural information or commentarial information on various forms of Buddhism. In the UK, almost every possible form of traditional Buddhism, of Mahayana, Theravada, Tibetan Buddhism, as well as all kinds of modern forms of Buddhism. Different organizations design their own Buddhism in their own way. So there's all kinds of modern adaptations to Buddhism in the UK, as well as traditional forms. So this was not existent 50 years ago. This was not possible, say 50 years ago in either the UK or the United States. So it's very heartwarming to see the amount of interest here in Malaysia, because I didn't see anything of this when I lived here 45 years ago in Sabah. It wasn't. I didn't have any inkling that anything like this meeting would have an Ajahn Chah celebration day in Kuala Lumpur. I would never have conceived that as being possible. And so now where we go with the amount of interest here in Penang and various other places in Malaysia among people who see the value and the wisdom behind it, and who have a willingness to listen, to study, to practice. This I want to encourage and assure you this is a very good direction to take, both for personal ways of solving problems and difficulties within your own life, as well as generating good qualities in the society that we're living in. Because here in Malaysia we want to be good citizens and not cause divisions and problems, to be divisive within this society, but to be a force for harmony and goodness, generosity within this lovely country of Malaysia. So I'll leave this with you as a reflection for your consideration, and I'd express my gratitude to all of those who have so well organized this event, and feel very honored to be invited to participate. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.